Okay, we're going to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another update for you from BOLDR Supply Company. Now a little bit about them. They're based out of Singapore and Malaysia. They manufacture watches and gear that are super tough, stylish, and functional. And they're pretty much always ready for adventure. Now in terms of the type of watch, this kind of falls within two categories. One, it's a chronograph. Some key common characteristics in design language. When you're looking for a chronograph, you're going to see, of course, external pushers to activate timing functions, multiple subdials to measure elapsed time, often featuring additional scales dependent on the subgenre. Now, this kind of has two kind of subgenres, one being an everyday outdoor adventure watch, which would be something that's sporty, legible, tough, and capable, but also specifically it's a regatta timer, which is pretty impressive. Now, this Odyssey Regatta is a real beast on your wrist, built to conquer the toughest regatta races, blending modern and classic elements for peak performance. This stainless steel sailor features a dark blue dial that's highly legible and easy to use. With this really cool, unique 10-minute countdown dial under the 12 o'clock. It's limited to only 100 pieces and individually serialized from 1 of 100 all the way to 100 of 100. And this is a lent-in piece from BOLDR. This has actually done the rounds in terms of reviews. This is the one that you've seen around, and it's probably rendering a little bit brighter, at least in this initial lighting situation here in the camera. So if you do feel like this might be a little bit bright, definitely stay tuned, because you'll see that this matte finish does play with light really, really well. Now you can get these for $14.99 direct from the brand, and they are, I think, a really great value from a brand that has an amazing aesthetic, that has really nailed these overbuilt technical watches. The only thing that might be iffy is really going to be the main elephant in the room, which is the scale on this piece. It is a very large piece. So let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, as you can see, quite a beast. Now, in terms of the specs here, it's 45.5 millimeters in diameter, which isn't huge in terms of, a chronograph by any means, but the thickness is actually 18.2 millimeters thick, and that is quite hefty. The nice thing is this is a also falls in kind of the diver category because of the amount of water resistance. You're getting 500 meters of water resistance with this, and you're getting that nice automatic helium release valve there. So this does have a reason for being thick, but that doesn't change the fact that it is quite hefty. The good news is it's actually quite balanced with these nice chunky links and this beautifully done V-milled clasp here. So it suits the aesthetic here, especially with the overbuilt and chunky nature. These clasps, there's a reason why they're so popular. They're milled, they have a lot of micro adjustment holes, and in this case, the harder edges do flow nicely with this more angular kind of hexid style bracelets. Everything is brushed, and of course all in stainless steel. You do get a nice sapphire double dome crystal with inner AR coating, so it does the job. Now this bezel itself is actually a 60 click bezel, and it's bidirectional, so you can go either direction, and it does the job. It's very nicely tactile. It works. These grips are easy to grip, which is great. And then you do have a screw down signed crown. These pushers actually aren't screw down. They, at least as far as I can tell, that's actually just kind of the casing, which probably helps in terms of water resistance, but these pushers are not screwed down. Normally, if they were, this would be a lock position, then you would unscrew them, and then they would look similar to the crown in that they would be flush, and then you could push them down. So these are actually non-screw down, which is impressive, and you probably still wouldn't want to use it underwater. Again, this is meant to be used above water. It just has a, that overbuilt thing, which ties into the theme and the execution of this piece. And I think Boulder have a very unique design language that they have really mastered. They make these watches look really great. I have a few Boulders in my collection, and they're really nice. And the thing that really crosses over for me is that they're not just a brand that has a bunch of models. They actually do have a brand design aesthetic, and every Boulder looks like a Boulder watch. And I mean that in the most complimentary way, because they don't all look alike, but they just have some key design features and traits that really stand out and flow well together. I think this dial layout is aesthetically really beautifully done. I think a smaller scale, of course, maybe without 500 meters, let's try to slim this down, make it 200 meters, and instead of a 45, maybe we make it a 42, and instead of 18 millimeters thick, let's make it 14 millimeters. I think that would sell like hotcakes, but that doesn't mean that this isn't epic. Like, this is amazing. You can see the nicely skeletonized hands, so you can still catch the date even through as you're getting to that 15-minute mark, which is fantastic. We'll actually let this run a bit while we go, because there's this really cool, unique countdown timer from here that's basically a 10-minute countdown, and then it gets into some red there. I won't pretend like I do regatta racing, but visually it is very handsome. And then you can see you have the running seconds here at the 9 o'clock subdial, and then just a standard counter here. I want to say this is an hour counter down here at the 6 o'clock position. So very nice, very well laid out. And then you can see, of course, even within that bezel insert, you're going to get, the nautical mile measurements. And again, for those of you that know how to use that, you'll use that. For those of us that don't, we'll just appreciate it in terms of it being finally executed within the theme. But let's take a look here as this crosses over. We'll get a nice little boom. So now it's at 9, right? So it's counting down from 10. And it's just a really cool little play there. I like that visually, and I think the offset is really beautiful as well. It's often tough with chronographs, depending on the layout and the way you have the subdials, to really balance everything out and make it not feel super crowded. And that's part of the size here, is what helps it not feel overcrowded. Now, in terms of the movement that's in here, you're getting an automatic ETA Valjoux 7750 Elaboré grade. The case back, unfortunately, doesn't show it off, but it does have the cool little sailboat there tying into the regatta theme, and it is nicely embossed and etched. Now, in terms of this dial, it actually does have a very nice kind of matte grain dial to it, which does play with the light very, very nicely. You do get a day-date complication at the 3 o'clock, and you're getting a lot of BGW9 Swiss Superluminova. 500 meters of water resistance, and then in terms of this bracelet, nice and thick here. Again, it flows well at 22 millimeters at the lug, and then it tapers down to 20, so it does have a taper there. Not the most dramatic, but honestly, I think a dramatic taper would have not really gone with this theme. I think with the overbuilt nature, it does make sense to just have a mild taper there. And then you are getting screw pin connectors, which is great and what a lot of folks ask for, so that works for me. And then you're getting this milled push button flip lock clasp with the micro adjustment holes. So with all that said, let's actually get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, it is quite handsome. It is large, yes, large and in charge. And then we get up close to the lens here. The distortion is going to make it feel like it's jumping off my wrist and maybe overpowering it, but you can see here I get my arm a little bit more in frame, and yeah, this is not bad, especially because it does have the right proportions. Now, the scale is a bit large, but in terms of having that rotating bezel, that helps shrink the dial, and then having, of course, that chapter ring helps shrink the dial down, and then getting down into the subdials being in the center, again, visually helping shrink things down in terms of visual weight, although, of course, with that brighter blue palette, which isn't super bright, it's not like a pastel or anything, but because it is more of a matte color, it's going to absorb light in certain ways and reflect the light in certain ways that make things feel a little bit flat, which I'd say actually gives more of an expansive feel versus if it was a little bit glossier and maybe soaking up some of it within reflection, or reflecting back negative space. It could help things be a little bit smaller, at least in terms of being read, but at the end of the day, ultimate legibility is what counts, and you can see as it's clicking away, counting away, it's a really handsome look. So yeah, I mean, does this feel really heavy on my wrist? Honestly, it doesn't. And it's not just because I'm super strong, which I am, but it's really because it's well balanced. It flows well. I think something like this could easily feel top heavy, but in this case, it doesn't. It feels nicely balanced, and yes, it is a little bit heavier when I think about it, and if I give it a jiggle, I'm not going to forget that this watch is on my wrist by any means. Check out that profile, the big toothy gear grip there, but I've definitely worn watches that were way more overpowering and that had less balance. So I will say, in terms of execution of theme, they've done a great job here in terms of thinking about ergonomics, thinking about legibility, especially in terms of all the information that you're going to be trying to read on here. So there's a method to the madness. It's purposefully big. It's not just large for no reason. Again, 500 meters of water resistance, all of the information that's being read that can be calculated on here. It's, that's no small task. Do I think that there's enough space within the dial, again, to shrink this down in scale a bit? Absolutely. But, there is definitely a huge market for large watches, and that's, they have a lot of loyal customers that like things on the larger side. And honestly, I'd rather have this watch being a touch oversized versus a touch undersized, because if you try to shrink this down to a 39, I think it would just look extremely odd, and it would just be smushed and you wouldn't be able to read anything on it. So it's not a one size fits all, pun intended, in terms of design, but it definitely works per the theme. So let's actually get this off the wrist, get a little bit of a closer look so we can get some lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay guys, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. As you can see, a lot of information even in the dark. So very cool, very standout, and again, not derivative. And it's just, it's a really well-designed, handsome piece. Might not be for everybody due to the scale, but one thing I actually do like to work in to these lume shots is some low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to be indoors, walking underneath overhangs, even when you're outdoors underneath the shade of a tree, or just spending time in your favorite automobile. So it is nice to see what these finishes, colors, and textures render like in less than optimal lighting, to include even some kind of harsh, high contrast lighting here, which would typically, expose any type of production defects. But in this case, you're just going to be exposing some of the wear marks from this tour piece, going to multiple reviewers and spending time on a lot of different wrists. But as you can see, still quite uniform from a finish perspective, the way that the light glides across those links, and the way that the light is actually holding on that dial. You can see it gives you a lot of different tones, definitely some on the darker side, some on the lighter side, but I think if you were having to say this is definitely not a navy blue, it still is a darker true blue versus, let's say, the subdials, which are definitely a lighter kind of more sky blue there. But you are getting a nice amount of contrast on the dial, so you're still getting a lot of legibility. And even if we get back into the, the real dark there, it still is quite legible. I do really like the layout here. So with that said, get the main lights back on here. Guys, closing thoughts. On the wrist, it does feel super solid and purpose built. It feels, I'd say, a hair top heavy, but the bracelet does do a really great job of keeping it planted on the wrist. And yeah, for me, I think if you shrunk this down, it'd feel a lot more crowded. So the 45mm width does help spread the 16mm of thickness, and then, overall about 18 when you include that the crystal as well. But it's nice. It's one of those things. Honestly, I have dress watches as well and other types of watches that I really like to just look at, and I don't necessarily like jump out to like I want to wear it. In terms of just design aesthetic, this is a really handsome watch, and if it was a little bit smaller, I think it could work. I do think a 42 by 14mm, 200 meters water resistance, I'd even settle for 150 or 100 because of the theme of the watch. I think that could work. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not an engineer or an industrial designer or anything like that. But I think as a consumer, that would resonate with, I think a more diverse demographic. Now, in terms of comparable models, I'm not huge into the Regatta specific competition, but I would say this piece more so does remind me of some beastly German-made chronographs that are kind of within that everyday adventure watch space. Kind of one of the other subgenres that this watch falls under. And in terms of the price per spec, this is still pretty competitive. You're getting an Elaborate grade 7750, and then it's also well designed with a fantastic theme and a great execution. So yes, maybe even if you're not into sailing and regatta timing, you get something like this. And if you're just somebody that has maybe a bulkier pocket knife and you're into that aesthetic, in terms of a tool watch, this is absolutely, along with pretty much every other BOLDR ever made, this is an excellent tool watch to do a job. So if you want a chronograph that has some great timing functions that can also be used in terms of, measuring water speed, then you'd be good to go here as well. So bottom line, I think if you have the wrist to pull this piece off and enjoy the theme, you'll absolutely appreciate the thoughtful execution here. Like, it is a very handsome watch. The BOLDR Odyssey line, they do have some dedicated divers within that line, and they do have them in kind of various sizes, typically ranging on the larger end. So I mean, the piece itself, its design language, it's meant to be in the larger scale. So you think about, and then the fact that it's a chronograph, they're meant, yes, there are small chronographs out there, but for the most part, in terms of legibility and design, it's going to be a little bit larger, just like you would think a pilot's watch is going to be a little bit larger than a field watch, and a dive watch is going to feel a little bit larger than a dress watch. So in the grand scheme of things, if you're going to have a 45mm in diameter watch, it probably should be something that is going to be give you, more information than time only. So yeah, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know this one isn't going to be for everybody, but I think most of the folks should be able to appreciate the design language here. I mean, I think this is a great looking piece, and I think my wrist can pull it off a little bit, but let me know in the comments. And if you like the video, please do it like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.